Hello beautiful creative friends, it's Belinda and I'm here with a new project to share with you for the Confessions of a Paper Addict design team. Now this is going to be a little bit different. It's not a process video as such. It is probably more of a tutorial. So I know that in November lots of my creative friends like to work on a Thankful 30 project where they create a mini album with 30 days of things that they're grateful for or things that they are thankful for. I certainly can't take on a project of that magnitude right now, but life has been pretty challenging over the last, well, probably for most of this year. So I thought that this would be a good opportunity to just take a little bit of time throughout the month of November to document some of the things that I am thankful for. And the way that I'm going to be doing that is in a traveler's notebook. So this tutorial today is going to walk you through how I actually create my traveler's notebooks. And it's also going to be a little bit of a process where I'm starting to gather a few bits and pieces together just to prep to make it a little bit easier for me to put this together throughout the month of November without it taking a whole heap of time. So the cut file that I'm working on first of all is one of the new cut files in the store this month. This is the Stitched Thankful cut file, and I know you're not going to be able to see this on camera here because there's almost no contrast, but I have gone ahead and cut that from white cardstock. Now because I know that this is going into as a page into what is going to be my traveler's notebook, I did also get my silhouette to cut out the actual page. So if I tear this off now, that's going to be the size of the page that gets adhered into my traveler's notebook. And then if I get up close, you can probably just see there that I've got that thankful Stitched Thankful cut file. I've got it cut and it's got all the stitching lines on it there. I am also, as part of my prep for getting this album ready, I have also gone ahead and cut out a whole load of these. These are the border punches, or this is the border punches cut file. I've sized them down so that the width of each of them is going to fit into my traveler's notebook pages. And then I've already been through and pulled out some of the pattern papers that I want to use in the notebook, and these 4 cardstock colors just kind of coordinate with most of those pattern papers. It's probably not making a whole lot of sense right now, but as we work through and we come back, hopefully it will start to make sense a little bit more. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and stitch around these words, and then we will get stuck into the tutorial. All right, let's hop on fast forward. Okay, so I told a lie. We are not hopping on fast forward. I have already gone ahead and stitched all around that thankful cut file, and I have also backed it with some pink patterned paper. That stitching did take me a little bit longer than I had thought it would, just because it is so, because I've shrunk the cut file down quite a bit to fit onto a traveler's notebook page. The stitching points are quite close together and really fine, and I didn't want to tear any of the paper, so I had to go really slowly with that stitching to make sure that I didn't destroy it. If you were working this cut file in a larger format, so more like an 8.5 by 11 or a 12 by 12, it would certainly be a lot faster to complete. And I can already see there I've missed one little stitch, but that's okay. Yeah, it would be a lot faster to complete because the holes would be further together and you wouldn't have to be worrying about tearing the holes open or the paper at any point. But that's it, it's all done. So what we need to do now is get started on making my traveler's notebook. I went ahead and I just picked out a pattern paper. Now this is from Rosie's studio collection, the name of which escapes me Unconditional. This is from the Rosie Studio Unconditional collection, so that's the papers that I've chosen for this traveler's notebook. So I chose this paper. I have trimmed it down from 12 by 12 to an 8.25 inch height. If you are using a patterned paper that has some directionality to it, you just want to be mindful about the direction of the pattern before you're trimming it down. So my 12 by 12 paper was like this before I trimmed it. If I had trimmed 8.5 this way, it would mean that when I fold it over, the pattern would be sort of potentially not the right way around. So that's what I've done it there. Don't need to worry about the width just yet, because we will fix that up once we have put the notebook together. I've also grabbed some white paper for the inserts. Now, I have been asked this question before, because I like to work on my pages outside of the notebook and then adhere them in. I use quite a really lightweight copy paper. And for those of you who are in Australia and are interested to know what it is that I use, it is from Officeworks, and this is the paper here. It's called the A4 Premium Digital Silk paper. It is got like sort of a shiny, glossy finish to it, which means it's pretty unforgiving when you adhere anything down. It won't come back up, but it is a really nice, thin, lightweight paper, but it's still quite strong, so it doesn't tear easily. So that's what I use to make my notebooks. But of course, you can use any kind of copy paper or any paper that you like. You can also use some patterned paper if that's more your style. What I love about making these travelers notebooks is that it is incredibly flexible. You can make them with whatever paper, whatever products, whatever supplies suit you. So to make this notebook, I have pulled out 10, these are A4 sheets of paper, and A4 just happens to be 8¼ inches wide. So I've pulled out 10 A4 pieces of paper. I've folded each of them in half and then nested them inside each other. 10 pieces of paper, 10 sheets of paper gives me, sorry, not 10, I've pulled out 5 pieces of paper. 5 sheets folded in half gives me 9 open-faced spreads altogether. So that's going to give me 18 spaces for my thankful entries. And that should hopefully make sense in a little while. So I've gathered those together, folded them, nested them all into each other. Now I just want to make sure that they are nice and tight and nice and even. And then to hold it all together while I pierce the holes down the middle, I'm going to use these binder clips and just clip those down, so that will hold it together and prevent anything from shifting. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have one of these little tools, which is from We Are Memory Keepers, and it is specifically designed for bookbinding. It makes it very, very easy, but if you don't have one, it doesn't mean that you can't do this. What I would do if I didn't have one of these is I would take my ruler, and down where I've got that folded line already, I would mark out with a pencil where I wanted each of my holes, pierced holes to go, and then using something like a mouse pad or some piercing foam, I would then go and pierce all the holes along the seam. So I am going to jump off camera and put these holes into the middle, and then we'll come back and stitch it all together. All right, so I've zoomed in quite a bit here so that you can see the placement of my holes. Now again, where you place your holes and how many holes you actually make is entirely up to personal preference. I know there are some people who will just do perhaps 5 holes spaced out evenly. The most important thing is to make sure that one of your holes is in the middle and that you've got at least 1, probably 2 on either side of it, just to give some stability to that spine. Now for me personally, I actually like to have mine spaced quite close together, and I also like to have them quite close to the edge of the paper. And the reason for that, as I said, is that I work outside of the notebook and then I adhere pages in. So I want to make sure that the binding on my seam is nice and strong and nice and sturdy and isn't going to tear with the weight of the pages that I add to it. So to stitch mine, I use, this is just an embroidery cotton. I use a white embroidery cotton. It's quite thin, there's only 1 strand, and for me that works really well. Now you want to make sure that you have at least double the length of your notebook, and probably a little bit more. I always like to err on the side of caution here, and so I will measure out a double length, if I can get that working again now. and then cut a little bit more off as well, because you do need to make sure that you've got enough to tie off. So I'm going to cut nearly 3 times as much. I'm not fussed. As you can see, I've got a whole roll of this embroidery floss here, so it's no bother if I end up throwing some in the bin. I'm going to thread that needle, and another choice to make, which is entirely up to personal preference, is where you actually have the knot that's tied in the twine to hold it together. So I know some people like to have it in the middle, in the center of their book, which leaves the spine nice and clean. For me personally, I prefer to have mine on the outside, because once I have completed some notebooks, I will be adding them into a notebook cover, so you're not going to see that part of the spine anyway. So with that said, if you are wanting your knot to go in the center of your book, you will start stitching from the inside of the book to the outside. But for me, because I want mine on the outside, I'm going to start stitching on the outside. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle through that center hole, and I'm going to pull it through and leave, I'm probably going to leave about three or so inches just loose there, because I will need that to tie it off. While I'm stitching, I use my hand on the outside to just hold that in place. And now the stitch that we're going to do, it's going to look like a back stitch, but in actual fact, we're going to do a running stitch in one direction, and then come and backfill back to the center again, then a running stitch up to the other end, and then come and backfill back to the middle again. So I'm going to stitch away. I will speed this up a little bit just so that you can see the process, and hopefully it doesn't go out of focus too often while I am stitching here. Okay, so I have now stitched all the way along. You can see a nice straight seam down the middle, and if I flip it over, you will see, hopefully, that I have got my stitching along both sides, and then there is just this small little gap here, and this is where I'm going to be tying my thread off into a knot. So I'm going to remove that needle. Now when I'm tying it, because this is my center point right here, I'm going to try and tie the knot so it sort of falls into close to this little pierced hole here. So for me, I like to tie my first knot, and if you can see, I've pulled it there so it's next to that hole. And I'll put my thumb down to hold it in place, tie it off again, and then just for good measure, I'm going to add one more little knot here, and that should definitely be enough to secure that knot in place. I want to pull it nice and tight, so it is a tight knot, but not so tight that the twine snaps, which has happened to me before when I've been a little bit too heavy-handed. And then again, personal preference as to how much of a tail you like to leave. If you're concerned about the knots coming undone, you could leave a slightly longer tail, which will give you some wiggle room to be able to tie those back up again. I'm pretty confident that with the twine that I've used and the knots that I've tied, that's going to stay there. So I'm going to trim that off pretty close. Now I can take my clips off because my notepad is all put together and it's not going anywhere. And there. So this is the outside of the book. So you can see we've just got that little knot there. And then there is the inside of the book. All right. So the only thing that we've got left to do is to trim this down. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here. Okay, so this is 8¼ inches tall, and that is the height that I want it to be. So I'm going to leave it there. Now, again, entirely personal preference as to how wide you leave this. I think a standard traveler's notebook is about 4¼ inches wide. I like mine to be just a little bit wider, so I actually make mine 4½ inches wide, and that means that my internal pages end up being 4¼ inches. So I'm going to line that notebook up on my mat. I want to make sure it's nice and straight across the bottom and also nice and straight across the side. Then you're going to need a good sturdy blade. So this is a blade that I've purchased. It's a pretty heavy duty one from Bunnings, which is a hardware store here in Australia. You're also going to need a ruler with a metal edge. So these kind of rulers will work, but you'll probably just need to be a little bit careful about placing your fingers as you're dragging the blade down. I actually have this gigantic beast of a ruler, which is from We Are Memory Keepers. It's got a nice metal edge on the side, and I like that it's got this little grippy piece in the middle, so my fingers are completely out of the way while I'm cutting. So I'm going to measure 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's my half point. Going to line up my ruler and grab my blade. Now I don't actually need it to be that deep because it's not a particularly thick notebook. And then I'm just going to run the blade alongside that metal edge and do it a couple of times until I get a nice clean cut. You could run this through a paper trimmer. My only concern would just be movement in the notepad as you're running it through, and the potential for that to sort of leave you with a jagged edge or an uneven edge. That's why I like using the blade with the ruler, because it's nice and straight and it is nice and clean. That's a really nice clean cut. All right, so there is my traveler's notebook ready to go. Now we will hop on fast forward and I will just talk you through the rest of the things that I'm doing to prep this little project to make it easy for me to complete through the month of November. Okay, so I know a couple of things about this project that I'm going to be working on. Number one, I know that it is certainly not going to be a daily project. I'm definitely not going to get 30 entries. I may not even fill the entire notebook. I also know that if it is too time consuming, I am not likely to get a whole lot of entries into this little notebook. So to try and simplify the process for myself, I've worked out a little formula for each of the entries. I have created a template over in Photoshop, and then I've been through the paper pack for this Rosie Studio collection, and I've pulled out a handful of papers that I really liked. And what I am going to do is I'm going to trim each of these down to 3½ inches square, and then they will be the mat for each photo that goes on to the entry. And now in a little while in this process video, you are actually going to see me put together my first entry just to show you what that format looks like. Having said that, if you are interested in grabbing a copy of the template that I have created in Photoshop, please feel free to go ahead and leave me a comment down below, and I will see if I can get that shared somewhere for you to use. It's pretty simple. The format is going to be a square photo at the top of the page. I'm going to be using those border punch cut files, which are also from the Confessions of a Paper Addict store. I'm going to be using those as a little divider between the photo and the journaling. And then underneath, I'm going to have a title and then some centered journaling. I am going to stitch a border around each of the pages because although I want to keep it quite simple, I also want it to have some visual interest. I want it to look pretty, and I want it to reflect my own personal style. If you have been watching any of my videos for any length of time, you'll know that there are a few key things that really speak to me and my personal style. I love adding texture. I love adding lots of layers. I love adding some stitching. And I also like things fairly simple and clean. So I've got all of those papers prepped, cut down into 3.5 inch squares. I showed you there my little dish with all of the border the border punch cut file pieces cut out, and now I'm going to work on my title page. So I had moved that thankful cut file towards the top of the page, knowing that I wanted to put just a little bit of information, typed information down below, just indicating what this particular notebook is all about. I wasn't really too sure what I wanted to do in the way of embellishing. Didn't want to go over the top. I didn't want to make it too busy. Like I said, I do like things a little bit clean and a little bit simple. So in the end, I've settled on this die cut piece. It's a really pretty little heart banner, and I like this because the colors in the heart are reflected in the colors of the pattern papers that I have chosen to use. I toyed with the idea of adding some florals because, again, if you know me, you will know that I love all things floral. And I play around with a few different pieces, just trying to see if there's somewhere that they might sit and they might look okay. But in the end, I push all those to the side and decide that I'm going to keep it nice and simple and just have that little banner. And my journaling. So my journaling for this one, I didn't use my typewriter. I actually typed it out at the same time as I created my first page and printed that off as well. And then I have just used my little trimmer to trim it down into strips, and I'm using a little bit of wet adhesive to adhere those down underneath the little banner. And the finishing touch here, I am going to take it away in just a moment, and I'm going to add a stitched border, which I'm going to get up close here. It takes a little bit to focus, but I've chosen a pale, like a buttery yellow thread to stitch around the border of that. And then just to fill in that tiny little bit of white space down the bottom, I've grabbed one of the puffy stickers. It's kind of like a tealy blue green sort of buffalo checked puffy heart sticker, and I've used some wet adhesive with that just to make sure that it's going to stay in place. Because it's not going into a pocket, I like to apply a little bit of extra wet adhesive to anything that I put down onto a traveler's notebook spread, just to make sure that it's not going to shift around if the adhesive isn't quite strong enough. So the only thing that is left for me to do with this page is to adhere it into my notebook, and I thought, hey, since it's more of a tutorial type video, why not leave this part of the process in so that you can see how I get these stuck down nice and straight. So I add some double-sided tape around each of the edges, and then I just pull off one of the corners and line up the opposing corner where there's no adhesive, and then I make sure once it's straight, I can peel off the rest of that adhesive, peel off the other 3 sides, and then I can lay it down nice and flat. I think I have a little bit of trouble with this particular tape, so I don't use my my ATG. I do use double-sided tape in my notebooks, and that is just so that it gives me the flexibility to get those in place, because as I mentioned at the start of the video, this paper, it's got kind of a glossy finish to it, and anything that I stick down, it stays stuck. There is no movement whatsoever. So here I am working on my first entry. I'm not going to show you me sticking it down, but I am just showing you once again where I place the tape. I'm going to flip that over. You can see I have printed it off. It's got the title. I thought about showing it to you, but then I was having trouble with the tape and decided not to. So I've got the title, I've got my journaling. I have also already run it through my sewing machine to add a pink border with some thread, and I chose a pink that matched that little border punch cut file there. I've grabbed one of the pattern papers that I just trimmed down, and I left a little bit of a white border around my photo, and then I'm going to put that little border underneath, adhere that down, and that will be it. That is as simple as these little entries are going to be, and it is going to be this way for each entry that is in my little notebook. As I said, if you're interested in getting a copy of the Photoshop file that I use to create this template, please feel free to leave me a comment below and I will find out a way to get that to you. But for now, I do hope that you've enjoyed this video and this tutorial. If you have any comments, any feedback, any questions, please go ahead and leave me a comment in the description box, a comment in the comment box below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I will leave it there for now and say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.